Denzel Boston's got a big decision ahead of him. Should he come back to school or go to the NFL draft?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there. I'm going to talk a couple of recruiting notes at the very end of the show. Guys like Jon Ioane, Noah Roberts, who have placed Washington in their respective top 10s, what they bring to the table, how important they are in this class. We'll dive into that later on, because I want to talk about a whole bunch of key eligibility decisions that are going to be coming down the pipeline for Jedd Fisch and the 2026, as we're starting to get into that point in time already, which feels weird, Washington Huskies, but none are more important than wide receiver Denzel Boston. And I don't just say that for the state of the roster, where Washington did a tremendous job late in the 2026 recruiting cycle, going out and flipping Jordan Clay away from Baylor, getting 4-star Trez Davis after he decommitted from Tulane. Washington did a really, really nice job in that respect, but none of that is nearly as important. And I mean that with all due respect to those guys, because they are still true freshmen, or incoming freshmen even at this point in time. None of that is as important as Denzel Boston. He's a preseason All-American coming into this season and has been one of the most productive wide receivers in the Big Ten over the last 2 years. And that's something that can't be replaced. And if you're able to bring him back for his senior season, I think that would be a huge step up. So let's talk about the positives and why Denzel Boston should return to school, because there are a lot of really good arguments on both sides, where I think that nothing is more important right now in terms of coming back than how his 2025 season ended, where we'll see if he's able to go in the bowl game. We saw in the LA Bowl on Saturday, we saw him play a good majority of the game against Oregon in the final regular season game, but that was coming off a 3-week stretch where he got hurt against Wisconsin and was in and out of the lineup with an ankle injury. He misses the following game against Purdue and then is out there for a couple snaps as a decoy against UCLA. So that is a really unfortunate way to come down the stretch of what maybe you expected coming into the year to be your final season. And it's one of those things where you can couple that in with maybe if you're able to come back for one more year, you're able to post even more just solid numbers. You're able to move up the history books at Washington. Just more production is never a bad thing when it comes to your reputation for the NFL draft. But at the same point in time, I think this injury is one of those things where, as minor as it might be, if he is healthy going into the pre-draft process, assuming which is my opinion, but we'll get there in a little bit, assuming he does enter his name into the 2026 draft, there are going to be a lot of questions about his health. And if his ankle is fully healthy, he'll have certainly plenty of time to rehab and recover before things like any all-star games he might be invited to or the NFL draft. And I think that walking at senior day was telling towards what his decision might be. But again, we'll get there in a little bit, because one of the biggest selling points that I think Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff might have in their corner right now is, hey, look at how good this team was this season. Look at how many steps we were able to take in the right direction. And if you win this bowl game on Saturday against Boise State, you're at 9 wins for the year. And all of a sudden, hey, yeah, we are right on the cusp of making the college football playoff. We just need to do 1 or 2 more things next year to get over that hump, which I think is very possible for this team when you look at the talent. Something we've talked about on the show now for several weeks is what kind of talent infusion this Husky team is getting from this freshman class, what we expect from the transfer portal, who is already set to come back for the 26th season. I think those are things that could all work in Denzel's favor. And it's something Jedd Fisch talked about during his Monday press conference, saying, he's been in touch with Rome Odunze about this process, who obviously made the big decision at the end of the 2022 season to come back for 23. And then, of course, Washington goes on that tremendous run to get all the way to the national championship, largely on the back of Rome Odunze and Michael Penix. So I feel like that's one of those things that you could look at all of that and say, all right, these are all very, very sound arguments, because if Denzel Boston does decide to come back, obviously Washington is going to make sure that financially he's very well taken care of when it comes to NIL and everything like that. We saw how he was utilized this year in that space, and Jonah Coleman and Damon Williams, and how they were front and center on several different marketing campaigns throughout the year. And I feel like Denzel, especially being a hometown guy, if he does have one more year of college in him, that's going to be a major factor, is that Washington will be able to market him to the absolute fullest as one of the best wide receivers in the country and all that sort of stuff, which is all really great and really important. But that still pales in comparison to a first round draft picks paycheck, because that's where Denzel Boston is projected to go right now. Where you go look at some of the mock drafts from Pro Football Focus or whoever else you want to say. I personally prefer the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. They've done a great job with everything in that regard. And they have Denzel Boston as one of the top 4 or 5 wide receivers in this draft, where you look at some of the other names. I know I talked about him on yesterday's show, whether it be Jordan Tyson at Arizona State, Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane at USC, or Carnell Tate at Ohio State. Those are kind of the 5 guys right now. There are a couple other names that are on the fringe right behind them, but those are the top 5 consensus names right now, no matter where you look. I've seen Denzel Boston ranked as high as the number 11 overall player in the 2026 NFL draft. That is all extremely enticing and extremely hard to turn down, because when you think about, again, what this class might hold from a competition standpoint, it's not necessarily as extreme as what you're going to get in 2027. And this is something where maybe Denzel wants that elite competition. But in 27, we know there's an elite wide receiver 1 prospect already in Ohio State's Jeremiah Smith. Alabama's Ryan Williams is another one of those guys who maybe, just with all his physical traits and everything, does wind up going ahead of Denzel, and there's no way for him to overtake him. Those are things to consider in this process as well, because all of that in your draft stock, it all impacts the paycheck at the end of the day. And that's one of those things where I'm not saying by any means that is Denzel's number 1 priority, because I don't believe that it is. But it's one of those things that you need to consider in this process, because whatever advisors you might have, whether it be an agent, the NFL Draft Advisory Board, whoever it is, that is something that they're going to consider, and you are going to see that no matter where you turn as you continue to consider this process in just all of its different avenues. And on top of that, another thing you have to consider is exactly how I open this, because it's very, very important to think about, is the risk of injury. If Denzel does want to come back for another season, who's to say that, obviously nobody ever wishes that on anybody, but who's to say that he doesn't wind up getting hurt at some point during his senior season, which maybe it's more severe than the ankle injury he suffered. And it does wind up impacting his draft stock at the end of the day, because there is concern around his health at that point in time. Those are all things that need to be considered in this process. And the reason I wanted to talk about it pre-bowl game is all of this is going to impact Washington's decisions when it comes to the transfer portal, where maybe you do want to go take a receiver if he does wind up declaring for the draft. And if not, that's just another spot you have filled out. And then there's just so much extra talent in that room for, Jordan Clay and Trez Davis and Mason James, Blaise LaVista, the 4 incoming freshmen to learn from in that regard. That's all great. But this is one of those things where at the end of the day, I feel like there's a lot to consider on both sides. And in my opinion, I feel like that Denzel is going to wind up going to the NFL draft. I think that Washington has put together a very compelling pitch for him to stay with everything I just talked about. I feel like those are all very big selling points for Denzel and his entire family right now at this point in time. But the allure of the NFL and this particular draft class, I think, is very, very important, because the one thing I want to reference before we move on here is a name Seattle fans are all very familiar with in Jackson Smith-Njigba. Because if Rome Odunze did decide to declare in the 2023 draft, he probably would have been battling with Jackson Smith-Njigba for the wide receiver 1 spot in that draft. And that guy went 20th overall. And with all of the physical traits that some of these guys have in the 26th draft, there's no way that Denzel wouldn't be a top 15, top 20 pick. And that's not to say that he can't do that by waiting another year. But when he gets buried behind some of those other super elite guys like him, it's going to push his stock down a little bit more. And we might not see the same run on wide receivers that we possibly could in this draft if they're all valued really close together. All of a sudden, maybe we see a run of 5 receivers picked in 7 spots, and that could push Denzel up in terms of just what his stock is right now. Those are all things to consider, but Denzel isn't the only one with a big decision in front of him. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Aura Frames. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap, it's a way to share memories, because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it, so when they plug it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. I think this would be a great gift for either one of my parents, who I know they don't see enough of me at this point, and just having me in their lives every day, and my sister and their pets, I guess, is all really important to me and our entire family. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. So as we continue on here with some of these really fun eligibility decisions, one guy who you don't necessarily have to worry about in that department is Jacob Manu, where Washington was able to preserve his red shirt this season. He's set to play in the LA Bowl, and he's going to be a key piece of this linebacker rotation next season. Now, the reason I wanted to start with him is not because of him in particular, but it's because of the lawsuit that he added his name to, where Jedd Fisch said they're expecting some kind of announcement, some kind of decision on December 15th about maybe some guys getting a 5 for 5. There's a whole lot that's going on there that I feel like is its own podcast at this point in time. But there are a whole bunch of members of this Washington roster that would greatly affect. A couple of them that I want to mention in the same light are just some of these other transfers from Arizona, whether it be Tacario Davis, Ephesians Prysock, Tai Uyunglele. I feel like those are all guys who need to be mentioned in the same light with this discussion, because I feel like Ephesians Prysock is one guy where, with the way he played this season, he's going to be off to the NFL. But knowing that he's got an extra year of eligibility, if possible, if this does come to fruition, would be a really important selling point for this Washington coaching staff. Because as we look at what this roster really needs in 2026, alongside, a high-end #1 wide receiver like a Denzel Boston, you also really need a high-end cornerback one. And either Ephesians or Tacario Davis would certainly be able to fill that role very well, with Dylan Robinson coming back and presumably slotting in as a starter, Rashawn Clark coming back in the nickel, Alex McLaughlin announcing that he's coming back as well. There is a whole lot of really nice experience in the secondary, but having a lockdown CB1 type of player, which is why you went out and got Tacario Davis from the transfer portal in the first place, would be a really key piece of this Ryan Walters defense, especially now that we know that it looks like Jim Knowles is going to be the choice for Tennessee, the now former, I guess, Penn State defensive coordinator. So I look at this roster and how it's shaping up, and if you're able to convince one of those two guys to stay, if this ruling is final and you are able to get an extra year of eligibility out of it, I feel like that would be a really nice win for this coaching staff, where you don't necessarily have to break in a new member of the roster, where if you're able to go out and upgrade through the transfer portal or anything like that, that's always great. You love to see that. But when you have talent that already knows the system and is ingrained with it and has a lot of chemistry with several guys on the roster, that also really just helps as this roster continues to move forward. And I feel like the corners aren't the only ones that you could say that with, because we need to continue to see more from this Washington defensive line in 2026 on the edge, where, we'll see whatever might happen with Zach Durfee, who certainly, if he applied for some kind of hardship waiver, should be granted an extra year of eligibility. I feel like Washington will still need to go out and upgrade at that position through the transfer portal, no matter what winds up happening. But on the interior of the defensive line, I certainly stand by that assessment and feel like you need to upgrade through the transfer portal. But if a guy like Tai Uyunglele, who maybe is a borderline UDFA practice squad kind of guy right now at this point in time, if this ruling does get finalized and he is granted an extra year of eligibility, he's one of those guys who I feel like Washington would push really hard to try to keep around, because he showed to be one of the most consistent pass rushers on this team this season. Now, he got hit with a couple of really frustrating penalties at different points in time during the year, but Tai was a really productive force in the middle of the defense throughout the season when paired with Anterio Thompson, who I'll get to in a minute here, Bryce Butler, Elinius Davis, whoever it is you want to say. And if you can keep some experience continuity along that defensive line while bringing in maybe some high upside pass rushers as well. That's the recipe to continue taking steps forward in this conference. And I feel like Ty could be a really key piece in unlocking some of those plans. Now, I mentioned Anterio Thompson in the same light. I feel like I'm just kind of firing through guys, but there are so many names that we need to talk about here. And Anterio is one that I'm really interested in because he has taken a very interesting journey to get to Washington, where he spent some time at junior college. He's at Iowa, then he drops down to Western Michigan before coming back to Washington. And one thing, when we got to talk to him in a press conference last month, was he talked about how much he's learned during his 1 year at Washington, how things are really starting to click and how much better he's gotten at technique and trusting other guys and doing his job and filling his role. And I feel like all of that is really important because when you watch him isolated on film, you see all the makings of someone who should be an extremely disruptive defensive tackle. And at different points in time, especially towards the end of the year, we saw it all start to click, and we saw him really start to put all of those different things together as this defensive line improved throughout the season. And he's one of those guys where if he applies and says that his year at junior college shouldn't count and he should get that year back, I feel like he's one of those guys who Washington would certainly make a concerted effort to try to keep around because of what he means to the interior of this defensive line. A guy with that kind of athleticism is so rare to find, and it's why he was the first member of the defensive line to commit through the transfer portals, because we saw all of this potential and all of that from his time playing special teams at Iowa to what he was able to do in his 1 year at Western Michigan as well. And I feel like with one more year of college, he's one of those guys who could be around 5 to 7 kind of draft pick because of what he brings in terms of upside as a pass rusher and how that would just connect in the right system, I would say is the best way to put it, at the NFL level, around a couple of other guys in like an even front where he doesn't necessarily always have to worry about double teams or different things like that. A lot like what we've seen from Sebastian Valdez during his time with the San Francisco 49ers in the preseason, and how that coaching staff seems to view him moving forward as well. So that's one of those things where if you're able to get an extra year for that guy, you absolutely need to do it. Now, one guy who I saved him for last because I feel like it's just a very interesting discussion where with a lot of these other guys, it seems very clearly cut and dry on what's going to happen or what should happen if, X happens or Y happens. One who I don't think it's very clear on at this point in time is Azzopardi, where I look at Azzopardi as somebody who, if there was a most improved player in the Big Ten award, I feel like that it would have gone to him this season. He was that good throughout the year. And like Denzel Boston earlier, it's really unfortunate that he suffered that injury at Wisconsin, misses the next couple of games. But when you go back and you watch the tape of him isolated, especially against Matayo Uiagalelei in the Oregon game, he was really, really good. And he's been really good throughout the season, whether you want to look at Pro Football Focus grades or you just go and turn on the tape. He's just very clearly gotten so much better. He was able to get more flexible in the offseason, which unlocked just so much of his athleticism. And we saw that really shine through on a much improved offensive line this year. And this is one of those guys where he's got an interesting decision ahead of him, because I feel like it's either one more year at Washington or go to the draft. I don't think that the transfer portal is something that he's mulling at this point in time. But this is one of those situations where I feel like it might be best for him to go to the draft as well. A lot like what I was talking about with Denzel Boston a little bit earlier, because he's someone, and this is a really weak offensive line class, which might push his stock up a little bit better if some people are kind of hinging on what he did in 2024. Because, again, like I said, Drew has certainly improved in every aspect of his game this season, whether it's just straight up knowing and understanding the scheme, how he's able to get out in front on certain blocks in the run game when he was getting downfield and climbing up to the second and third levels of the defense, which was really fun to see, but how he improved as a pass protector this year as well. Those are all things that the NFL is going to want to take a chance on. I don't think that this is a guy who, we're going to hear his name called in like the middle of day 2 or anything like that as a late second, early third round pick. But as you get in that late third round, early fourth round, he's somebody who has enough experience as a starter at this point in time, starting a couple of games at San Diego State in 2023, starting every game last year, and starting 10 games, I believe it is, this season as well. That's plenty of experience. And when you combine that with the tape he showed this season and that he's very clearly continuing to improve, I feel like it's not something where the NFL is going to view him as one more year and you could be a first round pick or anything like that, because he doesn't necessarily have that elite athleticism that we might see from some of these other guys where, look at what Cody Green brings to the table, or the elite strength that John Mills has in his frame. It's nothing like that. And I don't mean that to knock him, because he is a very, very solid prospect. And he's one of those guys who, again, not necessarily in terms of where he went in the draft, but in terms of what he's turned into, could be a lot like what Roger Rosengarten has been for the Baltimore Ravens, where if you find the right scheme fit for that kind of guy and just stick him at right tackle as a late third, fourth round pick, somewhere in that ballpark, he could really, really thrive in the NFL for a very, very long time. Again, in the right system. And that's something where maybe you don't want to risk that injury. Like I said, he missed a couple of games with what Jedd Fisch called a lower body injury, missed Purdue, missed UCLA in the second half of the Wisconsin game as well. So if you feel that you have enough starting experience, that's one of those things where if he jets off the NFL, I'm not going to be shocked. And in the long term, I'm very intrigued as to how that's going to shape up for this Washington offensive line, with what we talked about last week when Jedd Fisch said that he expects Cody Green to come in and compete as a starter, with John Mills, whether it be at guard or tackle, how this staff very clearly feels about Champ Talialia. Paki Finau has shown that he absolutely deserves a starting spot. Zach Henning balled out when he was asked to do so this season. Landon Hatchett is a guy who you don't necessarily want to replace that, because he's just proven to be a leader and a veteran presence in the middle of the offensive line. As you continue to build this depth, Drew would certainly be a starter. There's no question about that at this point in time. But it might be in his best interest to test the waters of the NFL draft, because I think he might like what he finds at this point in time. And it's just something to keep an eye on over these next couple of weeks, because speaking of some of these incoming guys like Cody Green, let's talk about the class of 2027, because Washington is going big game hunting. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift, a receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Who doesn't love a little bit of recruiting talk here on this show? First thing, a quick note. I've gotten this note from a lot of everydayers out there. Just felt it was worth rehashing one more time really quickly, because I wish I could do a little bit more of this for you, where I've been asked several times why we're not able to show video clips with, some of the prospect breakdowns that we're about to do right here. And as of this moment, that's something that I'm unable to do without rights to said videos. So for the time being, you just kind of have to see my face and hear me talk about some of these guys, because I'm absolutely enamored when I'm talking about some of the guys that Washington is going to be recruiting in the 2027 class. And this is something I'm really excited to dive into more in the next couple of weeks as the 2025 season officially wraps up. And now that pretty much the entire 2026 class is signed, barring a surprise late edition in the February period, I'm looking at this 2027 class in a very particular light. And like I said before the break, I'm calling it big game hunting, because there's a chance. I know my buddy Scott Eklund over at Dogman reported that it sounds like this class might wind up being between 16 and 18 players by the time it's all said and done. But when you look at the names, when you look at some of the guys that this coaching staff is in on in the 2027 class, it is very clear that they are looking at some high floor, even higher ceiling, versatile impact additions at every single position. And those are guys who can play early and just fit this scheme really, really well in one way or another. We've talked about some of the top players in state a lot, like Sione Cajo, who said that Washington is among the leaders right now. It looks like it's down to UW and Oregon in his recruitment. Tavita Nonu, a lot of these guys in state, Jacova Doyle, Braylon Pope. I really like where Washington is sitting with some of the top in-state players in the 2027 class, but there are a couple of out-of-state players that we really need to break down. The first one, who is probably my favorite prospect to watch in the 2027 class, announced his top 10 on Wednesday as I record this. I don't remember what day it is anymore. That's four-star defensive tackle Jon Ioane from Tustin High School down in Southern California. Now, when you talk about watching someone's film as a treat, watching Jon Ioane's film is absolutely a treat because he doesn't just play defensive line down at Tustin. He doesn't just play offensive line. This kid plays quarterback there too, and it's like a wildcat quarterback. We've seen him throw the ball. We've seen him run around a little bit. It is so much fun to watch this kid play every single position in a very different way because nothing will ever compare to watching Vita Vea play running back at 280 pounds. But it kind of reminds me of that film with just the way that coaching staff wants to utilize him and just get the ball in his hands at different points in time, which is a lot of fun to watch considering he's also a really fun pass rusher to watch at the high school level. And that's one of the things where it's very clear his future is on the defensive line. But he's one of those guys where whenever you turn on the film, you can't help but notice the other things that he does. Where, yeah, a lot of guys play two ways, like T.I. Mukais, Washington's 2026 four-star defensive tackle signee, also played some offensive line at Cherry Creek High School in Colorado. So it's not something that's necessarily uncommon. The quarterback part, 100% is. And the more you watch his film, the more it's okay. Yeah, it shows not just the athleticism, not just those things. It shows his high level understanding of the game of football, which really does shine through when he's playing defensive line, because it's one of those things where I like to relate it back to what Derek Coleman-Brusa talked about when he came on this podcast. Was he understands that he is just big and strong and physical enough to run through every single player that he plays against on the offensive line in the Seattle Metro League. And it's very clear when you watch Jon Ioane's film that he absolutely has everything he needs to do that. He's listed at 6'3" and 295 pounds. It'd be a little concerning if he wasn't running through everybody in any typical high school league. But it's very clear that he has just worked on his game so much to refine just his hands and his feet and all of these different other little things that might not necessarily be noticed at the high school level more often than not, because there are so many kids that just are so much more physical than some of these other guys, some of these high level prospects that just understand, hey, I'm bigger, faster, stronger than you. You're not going to put a hand on me or I'm going to run straight through you. And that's not Jon Ioane's game. Where, yeah, absolutely, you need to do that at certain points in time when you need to make a play in the game, which also just kind of lends to the intelligence. But it's one of those things where as he continues to grow and just change his body whenever he does wind up in a college program, as Washington continues to be one of his top suitors, where he said in an article with Rivals Greg Biggins that Washington is the school recruiting him the hardest right now. I'm in no way, shape, or form surprised by that. And it's not just because the Huskies do need to continue to keep making defensive line upgrades in the 2027 class, but it's also because this is one of those guys who should be at the very minimum, like top 3 on your board, if not the number 1 overall player at the position. And I understand there are a lot of really talented defensive tackles out there on the West Coast in this class. I talked a little bit about Tavita Nonu earlier. I talked about him a lot on this show. Guys like Elijah Harmon and Miles Smith. I know Elijah Harmon has since committed to Oklahoma, but those guys are really important names to mention in this discussion as well. There are several other players in the state of California in this cycle that are really talented defensive linemen, and I think Jon Ioane has as good of an argument as any of them, including guys like Cassie Curry, to be the best one. He just really is that talented and that athletic. And I think that as this recruiting process continues to play out for him, I think we're going to continue to see Washington emerge as a major player here. And one where Washington has been a major player for a long time also released his top 10 earlier this week. That's 4-star running back Noah Roberts from Basha High School down in Arizona. And I wanted to lead with Basha High School because that's a really important part of this. That's where Damon Williams went to high school. And there could be a little bit of a pre-existing relationship there as well. But this is just one of those guys where when you go and you watch Noah Roberts tape, it's very clear that this kid is going to be a premier back at the college level. He's already getting comparisons to Bijan Robinson in terms of there are some scouts that are saying he might be the best running back to come out of Arizona since Bijan, which obviously is extremely high praise. But you look at the film and it's even more just kind of a testament as to why. people are making that comparison because it's the size, it's the long speed, it's the agility in space, it's the understanding of route running and pass catching and some of these other little things. And the way I want to relate all of this back to the big game hunting of the 2027 class is I feel like Washington is only going to be in the mix to take one running back this year. And that's going to be the case at several positions where you don't necessarily need to make multiple additions on a year in, year out basis, where we saw Washington add two really promising running backs in Brian Bonner and Ansu Sanoe in the 2026 class. And now in 2027, if you're going out there and you're looking at a guy like Noah Roberts, you can just continue to build an elite running backs room, which is what we've seen this turn into with what Adam Muhammad gave you down the stretch, with what Jordan Washington showed that he can give you as well, and what it feels like you're going to see moving forward from guys like Brian Bonner and Julian McMahon and Ansu Sanoe and Quade Carr and all of these kinds of guys. If you add another elite high upside talent like Noah Roberts to this room, it just continues to just lend credence to the fact that Washington is doing everything in its power to continue upgrading at every single position on a year in, year out basis. And Noah is one of those guys who we've talked about him several times already on this show. I know all you ever dares know what I'm talking about when I say that he really is the complete package at running back. You combine a guy like that with what Brian Bonner gives you, with what our good buddy Matt Doherty talked about on this show the other day, what a guy like Brian Bonner is going to bring to the table. There is so much that you can do in terms of just not just running Jedd Fisch's offense, but adding different pieces to it and adding so many other little wrinkles because there is so much talent at every level to contend with. Look at what Ohio State has been able to do for so long with the really talented stable of running backs that they've churned through over the last 5-10 years. And by no means am I comparing what Washington is building to what Ohio State is doing, because that is just so much more established in that regard in recent history. But at the same point in time, you look at Scotty Graham's background as a former Ohio State running back, and you look at just what this program can be on a year in, year out basis when there is significant investment from everybody from the top down, from the athletic department to this coaching staff that very clearly enjoys its time here and wants to continue to build something special here because Washington certainly has all the resources necessary to do that. This is what it takes. It takes going out and hunting these big time prospects on a year in, year out basis. And when we look at this class again, if it is between 16 and 18 guys by the time it's all said and done, you know, I feel like some people are going to say, oh, it's a little bit smaller. That's a little odd. But you might look at the average of all these guys from like the 247 Sports Composite. And if it's sitting somewhere in like the 91, 92 sort of range in terms of that, you're bringing in higher caliber players on just a regular basis, that is what it takes to really continue to level up, because now you've established a really solid baseline and a lot of really great depth. And now it's about kicking it up a notch. And guys like Jon Ioane and Noah Roberts can absolutely do that for you. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you on Friday.